Is all of the momentum that the ACC built up in this early season already gone? Week 3 could have been one of the most brutal weeks that I can remember the ACC having over the past several years. I mean, you look at what happened. Virginia Tech got housed by Old Dominion. Duke goes down to Tulane and gets beat. Pitt, they failed to beat a West Virginia team that just lost to Ohio the week before. It's just an overall absolute disaster across the board for the ACC for the most part. Now, Miami did have a dominant win over USF, and that's the only saving grace as far as I can tell. They brought the Bulls back down to earth after they had that hot start and beat some other ranked teams. And then you have Clemson, who we all thought was supposed to be this national contender. But now, after their second loss in 3 weeks, they're out of that picture altogether and no longer a national threat. With that said, it wasn't all bad news for the ACC, though. Let's take some time and talk about teams that are rising up in the rankings. And I'm going to start out with the obvious here. We're going to talk Georgia Tech and Haynes King. Beating Clemson is a huge statement for that program. It's something that can maybe get them over that hump. And they absolutely earned this bump in the power rankings. But with that said, I am a little bit skeptical about them as a true CFP contending team. And that lies with the fact that Haynes King, if you watch that Clemson game, he's carrying such a heavy workload and he has an injury history in his past. And I think it's fair to wonder and question, can he hold this up over a full season? And I'm not sure the answer is yes. NC State also is going to deserve a rise here. The defense looked very shaky in that first part of the game against Wake Forest, but they tightened it up over the second half. And you look at the offense and it's balanced, it's explosive. It might just be the most complete offense in the ACC right now, in my eyes. And then there's Cal, and I'm a little on the fence with them. I'll admit it. I was wrong about them from the early season. They have a quarterback that's very legit, Jaron-Keawe Sagapolutele. It looks legit, and this team is better than I expected. They're proving every week that they belong in this league, and I think that it's somewhere where you're going to see them continue to get better. And finally, while Miami was already sitting at number 1 technically, and they can't really rise any higher, they're clearly in a tier of their own. And they handled business against USF. It's a team that had beaten Florida, had beaten Boise State the past 2 weeks, and other ranked teams couldn't really get past them. So Miami didn't just beat them, they dominated them, and they proved that they're just in a class of their own when it comes to the ACC. Now, let's talk about the teams that are falling in the rankings, in the power rankings this week. And so you've got to start with Clemson. And look, I gave them the benefit of the doubt after the LSU loss. They were competitive in that game. They looked the part of a team that's going to compete nationally. I even cut them some slack after that Troy game where they struggled early. But now it's the third week in a row that this team has just gone long stretches in each game, and they're not looking anything like a top 25 program. Cade Klubnik just candidly has been disappointing. They need Antonio Williams back in the worst possible way. They need a spark on that offense, and I just don't know if they're going to get it from anywhere else. Next up, we're going to talk Boston College, and that was just such a brutal loss for them. They nearly beat Michigan State in an away game, and then they go and travel to Stanford, and it's a team, frankly, that's been one of the worst Power 5 programs in football, if not the worst, and it's just a gut punch to your program. They had control of that game if you watched it at all, but they just made mistake after mistake that took them out of it, and it's just got to be disappointing for them overall. It's the kind of loss that can just derail a season completely. You can't talk fallers this week without talking Virginia Tech. They may have just hit a rock bottom as a program. They got blown out by Old Dominion, an in-state team. They fired their coach in week 3, so now they're going to face a mass exodus of players, in all likelihood. This season's going to get very ugly. It's going to happen very fast. They're going to be uncompetitive. And finally, we're going to talk Pitt. And, this was their first real test of the season, and it came against West Virginia in a big rivalry, and they failed it miserably. If you want to get taken seriously in the ACC or on a national level, you have to beat a team like WVU. They're basically a middle-of-the-pack benchmark, and they fell short. So Pitt, they still have the pieces to win some games, but the loss has to be a discouraging sign. All right, so let's run through the full power rankings as we head into week 4 here. And for me, this is how things are shaking out. When you look at Tier 1, and we've been calling that the legit national contenders all year, it's clear to me that Miami sits alone at the top. Beck's been sharp, Tony's a budding star, and really the biggest key for me is they're winning games in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and it's just obvious that they're in their own class as far as the ACC is concerned. We shift our attention to tier 2, who are calling capable challengers who could, get into that CFP conversation. And as we talked about, Georgia Tech has earned their spot at the top of this group after they handled Clemson. Though, like I said, I do still question their long-term durability and their ability to hang on to that. You have teams like Louisville, who's next, who has continued to take care of business throughout the year, and Florida State, who's coming off of a bye, still has arguably the best resume in the ACC after beating Bama and hanging 77 against a weak team, but still, they have to be considered here. Now, tier 3 are the ones that we still think could make noise, make a push, possibly get into that CFP conversation. SMU's headlining that. They bounced back after losing to Baylor by beating a Missouri State team. NC State is still climbing up, and their offense looks dangerous. And if their defense figures it out, they're going to be scary for teams. Clemson slides all the way down into this group after showing they're just not an elite team right now as their roster is constructed. Virginia had a really competitive win, or a really good win, against a team that shouldn't be competitive in William & Mary. Cal continues to impress. Their quarterback's legit. I can't help but put them in this group. And then Pitt and Duke are going to round out this really rather large group of the ACC, even though they have their own questions as well. We'll find out more this weekend. So tier 4 is what we're calling the low ceiling group, and Boston College slides back in here after just a devastating Stanford loss, but their offense still has some dangerous parts to it. Syracuse picked up a win, but they are not inspiring confidence. That schedule continues to be brutal. Not sure how much more they can climb. And then UNC. Sure, Belichick got another win. They looked mediocre. I can't judge much based off a win versus Richmond. And then lastly, tier 5. This is going to be the non-competitive teams. Virginia Tech continues to drop all the way into this group, and their programs in total collapse could end up being the worst team depending on who transfers out. Wake Forest and Stanford are going to round out this group. Stanford will get the bump to not dead last. Wake will deserve that spot. I think that you look at their offense and it's just in complete shambles. I think that second half versus NC State is truly who they are. Their quarterback can't throw the ball. Teams are going to key in on Claiborne, who just can't do everything for that program. So there you have it. Miami's on top, a few real challengers behind them, and there's just a whole mess of teams who are trying to figure out who they are after that. All right, so let's close this out by taking a look ahead into week 4. And there's some pretty big games on deck. The first up, the one that I want to talk about, is NC State versus Duke. And for NC State, it's an opportunity to prove that they're more than just the early season storyline so far that they have been. If they can go on the road and take care of business against this Duke program, it's going to set them up to be a real player this year in the ACC's race. They have some really winnable games coming up. That Virginia Tech game just got a whole lot easier in a couple weeks. But then you look at the other side of the coin, and Duke, they really desperately need this win to salvage what's been politely a rough start, more like a horrible start. But a loss here is going to dampen morale around that program. I truly believe that if they lose this game, the wheels could start to come off as you look at the rest of the season. And then the other big game next week in the ACC is going to be Miami versus Florida. And it's just a really massive out-of-conference matchup. And honestly, with the way week 3 went, it's bigger than just Miami. The ACC is going to need its top dog to show up here. Florida's good. They're fine. They're okay. They're a not great SEC team. And if Miami really wants to prove that it belongs in the college football playoff conversation, it's just kind of the game you can't afford to slip up in. You got to handle business here. The Canes got to really keep the whole league's credibility alive here. And that's where we're at. After a disastrous week 3 for the ACC, there are still some chances on the board to build some momentum back. So really, everyone, I thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all being here. If you enjoyed the breakdown, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss next week's rankings. And let me know in the comment who you feel like the real top dog in the ACC is right now. If you disagree on Miami, I would love to hear your reasoning behind that. But again, appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.